What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So in this video, I want to give you an overall general overview of Bubble, and I also want to talk about some of the problems that you can solve with Bubble. And I know a lot of you have been asking for kind of a beginner's tutorial, a general overview tutorial, because a lot of you are not sure how to build the app that you want to build. And so hopefully after this video, you're going to have a really good idea what you can accomplish with Bubble and what you cannot accomplish with Bubble. And that is because I want to give you a very solid foundation of how everything works. So here I am logged into Bubble. I have various applications here that I've been working on and that I also showed you in some of the previous videos. But right now I want to talk about something else. What I want to talk about is something what's called an MVC. This is very, very important to understand. So we have something called an MVC, and MVC stands for Model View Controller. And if you understand this, you will be able to understand the functionality and everything that Bubble does really, really easily. So let me go ahead and explain you this. It's actually called a design pattern, and there are actually many design patterns. This is just one of them. And so I'm going to go ahead and explain to you this design pattern. I'm going to explain to you how it works. And then we're going to go into Bubble, and I'm going to show you exactly how this is implemented with Bubble. So with Model View Controller, we have a model, we have a view, and we have a controller that ties them together. So model is typically your data model. That is all the data, how the data is stored, right? Because if you are building any kind of app, you need to structure it. You need to, maybe you're going to be getting this data somewhere using an API call, or you're going to be storing it locally in Bubble as well. The view is your UI, right? So if you have an application that interfaces with users, this is going to be your UI. This is what the user sees. If you're going to have something called a headless application, which is an application that does not interact with users because it interacts with another application, you're not going to have this view control, this view part here. And last but not least, you have a controller. And a controller is essentially, it's a broker. It's the business logic that talks between the view and the model. So, if you are interacting with the UI, you have a controller that does various business logic. So let me show you another diagram, right? So you have the view here. This is V. And so we have the view. We have the model. Actually, we have the controller here. This is C. And then we have the model right here, right? Which is our business logic. So this is your basic way to understand. And all of these apps that we talked about, Adalo, Bubble, Appgyver, they all implement this design pattern to a certain extent. And a lot of web apps, all these web apps that use everything. This web app I'm using right now, this browser called Chrome that I'm using in order to show you this, is using this MVC design pattern. Now, this is one of many patterns. There's a lot of other patterns as well that are being implemented. But this is one of the more famous ones. You can say one of the most well-known ones. And you kind of have to understand how it works. So whenever you have the view here, whenever you want to do something, right, you're not just going to be staring at the app. You're going to be making requests. You're going to be making requests to a controller. And that controller is going to be making requests to the model. You're never going to be making a request directly to the model. You can, but that is bad practice to do. Then the model is going to respond to this controller, and then the controller is going to respond to the view, and then the view is going to display it. It's really all that simple. This is how everything works. This is how a lot of them are based on. And if you can understand this part right here, not only will understanding Bubble will be very easy and straightforward, but you will also be able to understand a lot of these other tools very, very easily. And so let's go into Bubble and let's talk a little bit about how Bubble implements this MVC. Because remember, when the founders, the developers, the initial people who started Bubble, when they went out to actually build this tool, this is the first thing they thought of, right? So if you understand this, you understand a lot of the design decisions and the functionality that went into making, building this tool, right? So we're going to create a new app here, and we're going to call this MVC test. We are not going to start from a template. What kind of app? SaaS? Is it externally facing? What is the goal? Start a business. We're going to hit create, and we're going to be building this app. And then I'm going to show you all the pieces that fit into this framework. so that you understand exactly what we're talking about. We're not just talking in terms of theory. And so here I am on the blank screen. We're going to start with a blank page just to keep things simple. And as you can see, you have various tabs here. You have the design tab. This is your view tab, right? If you think about the design, this is this view right here. This is where you essentially create the interface that the user is going to interact with. So I can take this text. This is a read-only text. I can edit it. I can get the data from somewhere else, meaning that from a controller that's going to be getting it from a model. I can have a button. Right, the whole purpose here is to interact in one way or another. So depending on what this app is going to do, it's going to interact. Maybe it's going to display time, right? Maybe it's going to connect to a server and display weather. Let's say that. So in this case, you don't even need a button, right? Actually, you need maybe an input field. So you can drag this field here, and now you have an input field, right? So I can put it maybe here somewhere in the center, and this is going to be an input field, right? This is our view here, and there's lots of things that Bubble allows you to do. The main ones are things like input, multi-line input, checkbox, drop down, because these are supported by HTML. So if you want to build an HTML page, you can, these are built in, right? So for instance, you can drag a checkbox that has various states, true or false, checked or unchecked, whenever you check it, right? So it has a state on it. You have a drop down, which essentially is like an input, except it has limited choices, right? So you can have static choices, right? Or you can have dynamic choices. Dynamic choices are getting pulled from somewhere, and static choices, you're essentially right here, right? So I can put 1, 2, 3, and now I have static choices, right? So now if I run this app, it's gonna have these options here. Static means that they're fixed. Dynamic means that they're gonna be gotten from somewhere, right? Meaning like, and the way to understand it is dynamic is runtime, right? We only know the options whenever the app is running. But static means that we know the options right now, even before the app is ran. So that is one way to understand it. You also have radio buttons, right, where you can create multiple choices. It's kind of like a drop down as well, because you can only check one option. You have sliders, right? You have very nice inputs as well. You have really cool inputs. Sometimes slider is a good option, right? Min value, 10 value, step. You can create, maybe a value of from 0 to, you can do 100, something like this. And this could be percents, right? It could be a percentage, right? So you have 0% to 100%. Step 1. So when you move it, it moves with 1, right? And then you can display it. You can actually, you can display the actual value. You have a datetime picker, picture uploader. You have a lot of these elements here, right? And up here is the visual elements, right? You have your input forms and you have your visual elements. These things essentially display things. They're kind of these dumb elements. These are a little bit more interesting. They allow the user to input stuff, but these are just visible. They're visual elements, okay? You can also click on this and you can see everything that you have defined right now. So instead of me going, for instance, to here or going here, I can actually click this and it's going to select it for me. Why is this important? Well, it's important because if you want to create a group, you want to create some kind of hierarchy, it's going to be very useful. So for instance, I just dragged this group and I dragged an element there. So if I expand this group, I see a button. I can take this button out and now this group is empty. There's nothing inside this group. This is a way to see your hierarchy. And actually, I love creating groups because they allow me to move things, right? So if I put stuff inside the group, it allows me to group my elements so they're together. That's the first thing. And second thing is I can drag them together. I don't have to select them, right? I don't have to select them together and say I want to drag it like this. I can do that, but with a group, it makes it easier. So whenever I design a form, I build a form, I typically create the group. So this part, this design aspect is what I call kind of this dumb stuff, right? Because these are just elements that need to do something. But without the workflow, without the controller, they can't do anything, right? So they're kind of, it's kind of this like, essentially, if you just do this tab and you never go anywhere else, all you're doing is building like a web page, which is cool if that's what you want. But the whole purpose of Bubble and all of these tools is to allow you to do the work, right? It's to allow you to do something, right? That is why we use computers, because they solve our problems, kind of like a more complex calculator, right? A more sophisticated calculator. And that is why we have this controller here, right? This controller mediates with this actual data store, right? And sometimes you don't even need a data store, right? Let's say we are entering data here and we need to do a calculation, something like a calculator, right? We don't need a data store because we're not going to be storing anything. So there are things, like I talked about earlier in the video, where you have a headless application, where you have a controller and the model, but there's no view, simply because it's not going to be interacting with users. But you can also have a view and a controller without a model. That's like a calculator. It's an app that is not going to store any data, meaning like, let's say I have an input field and I have, I can type numbers. I have a bunch of numbers. I have operations such as multiply, divide, add, subtract, stuff like that. But it's not storing any of the results. In that case, we don't really need a model. We don't even need data. So there's that. And if you only have the view, you typically just have a web page, right? You have a web page it doesn't have any logic in it. It's not doing anything. And so that is kind of the first thing you have to understand. Next, we have the workflows, right? And so the workflows, the idea with workflows is that it can do everything. A workflow can do everything, and it can access everything that's defined here. So all your data that we're going to get to in a second, all your plugins that we're going to get to in a second as well, we're going to be covering your design. The workflow is the glue that connects it, right? So this is the logic. You want to multiply something, you want to divide, you want to get data from a database, you want to validate a user's input, any kind of logic, if, then, else, if, else, if this, if, else, if, all of this logic, essentially your decision making, that happens in this workflow, right? So if I click on it, right, so I have my design, and let's say I have this element here, and let's say we create a very, very simple app. We have an input here, and I'm going to have a button because we need to trigger this, right? So if I have a button here, I'm going to call this button, this my button 1, and then click me, right? You can just enter that. And now you have a very, very simple app. Now, without the workflow attached to this button, you just have a web page. You don't have anything, right? You don't have any logic that's happening. But once you attach a workflow, so if I go in here and I go to elements and I say an element is clicked, right? And I can choose which element is clicked. It's my if condition, right? And the event, all of this, we don't have to worry about it. Now I have my if condition, and now I need my then condition, meaning like if something happens, do this. This is decision making. That's essentially what it is. Then you can do, we can display something, right? So for instance, let's say it clicks. We can go to our element actions. We can say set focus. We can do set state. We can show. We can set, set focus. We can do a lot of interesting things, right? We can have data. We can modify. We can even send an email, payments, account. We can log the user in. Lots of interesting things. But what we can do is we can actually go ahead here and we can create a new element. Let's say we have another element here that shows some state. So for instance, this is called state, okay? And we have a text. This is our text 1, and this is our input 1, right? Input 1, something like this, so that it's easily to understand. And we go in here and we start edit workflow, and we have this action. And so now when that button is clicked, we can go to elements action, and we can set state, we can set focus, we can show an element, right? So we can say show this element, right? We can show, show an input, show text 1. We can modify it, we can delete it. And so for instance, I can say when button 1 is clicked, set focus to input 1. And then all I have to do is click on preview, and now it's going to set the focus to the element, right? Typically, you're not going to see right now, there's no focus on it. But if I say click me, it sets focus. This is your simple logic. Obviously, here is where the power is of Bubble. It's not really the power in the design, although design is great. Design is awesome. The real power is in these workflows, right? And a lot of these tools, different tools call them different things, but typically you're going to have some kind of action, right? We can, we have element actions, we have, payments, accounts, we can make changes to the current user, we have data, right? Things, create a new data, upload CSV. There's lots of interesting things that we can do. And what's interesting about Bubble is that things that you can't do here, we can always issue something called an HTTP REST request, which essentially means that if we go to this diagram, we have a controller. It can essentially go out and make a call somewhere on the internet. This is called a web service or a REST, right? We can make a REST request here. So you can call it an HTTP request, a REST request, a web service, whatever you want to call it. And this opens your possibilities to pretty much, you can do anything, right? Because there are these REST requests, these services that allow you to do pretty much anything, because you're no longer limited to the workflow. You're no longer limited to what can Bubble do, and you can do that. And the way you can do that, as I will show you, and the way to set it up is something I'm going to be showing you a little bit later in the video. So as you can see, anytime you want to take some action, anytime something happens in the response to the user's action, or whenever you're waiting for something, or whenever maybe you can have there's a timer or some kind of request that happens on an interval, you're going to be doing it here, right? Because all you have to do is add an event, and you can have a custom event. You can have an event that has to do with elements, right? Or you can have an event that has to do with users, right? Pages reloaded, do every 5 seconds, do when condition is true, right? You can do a lot of interesting things, and it doesn't have to be 5 seconds. It could be do every 30 seconds, right? So the way to think about it is you have these elements, kind of like an element is clicked, inputs values change, you have an element, something to do with the UI. But you can also have stuff not having to do with the UI, right? So a user is logged in, do something. A user is logged out, do something. This is something that's called a hook, meaning like there's a process that happens, and every time this process happens, it sends back a request back to Bubble, and Bubble knows about this process. And then, so for instance, let's say somebody's logged in, I am logged in, Bubble understands that somebody's logged in. Bubble goes and it sends this event to this workflow and says, okay, the user is logged in. Do we need to do something when that happens? So if you don't have anything defined, then nothing happens. But if I go ahead and define it, Bubble sees that there's actually an action taken when somebody's logged in, and we can do something now. So if I don't have an action, that login process still happens, but it's nothing is going to happen. So you can do a lot of things, not just with the UI, but also with other things. A lot of people don't know about this, because typically we only do stuff with the UI. A lot of people are not aware that you can actually do general. You also create a custom event, right? You can have an event name type of thing, and then you can trigger it from somewhere else, right? You can create custom events as well. So anytime you have a sort of action, anytime you have some kind of action, you're going to be in this workflows. The next thing I want to talk about is the data, right? And this corresponds to our model in the model view controller. And what's nice about Bubble is it allows you to create very interesting relationships. So what we have here is data types, right? So we have the user data type, right? This is the user that's logged in, authenticated, things like that. This is going to be the user here whenever you have an app that has various users. But we can also create a new type. We can create a new type called cars, right? We can create cars, and then we have a new data type, right, that we can create. We can have multiple cars, and that cars, it has various fields, right? We have a creator for the cars, we have the modified date. Every time we're going to have a new car, right, this is a type, right? So you're not going to be entering BMW, Mercedes here. For every one of those entries, right, instances of this type, right, like BMW, Mercedes, it's going to have these attributes. So creator, modified date, created date, slug, right? And so when we have the app, right, so we have this app data, we can actually create a new entry. And we can say we want to create a new car. Typically, you're going to be doing this from the app, right? So you have a slug right now. But if we go back here, it only has slug. So we can create a new field, and we can call it name, right? Field type is create. And now if we go to the app data, we can create new entry here. And we can say we want cars. And now it has two fields, name and slug. So we can say this is BMW and slug is BMW, whatever. We can create that. It's creating now. We have this. We can hide this message, and we can go back to app data. We can refresh it, and now if we go to cars, we are gonna have that one car that we just created, right? So if we go to cars, we have BMW, and these fields, right? The only user-defined fields is name and slug. These fields here, they're automatic, right? Because if you go to data types, you can see that these are built-in fields, right? We can't do anything. We can remove it. This field that we just, this field or attribute, you can also call it an attribute, we can change things, right? We can remove it, but we can't do anything. These are built-in fields. So, we can have name. We can also have a new field, color, right? This is going to be text, color of the car. Let's say maybe we have an auto shop or a some kind of a store, the online store that sells cars, like autotrader.com or something like that. Cars.com, Edmunds.com, one of these sites where you can buy and sell cars. Or maybe we have a site about cars, right? And you're going to have various cars. You might have a color, you might have engine, engine type, engine size, right? Something like this. This could be how many liters it has, the engine. This is a number. And that way, when you go to app data, you can actually modify it. And now let's say the color is blue, engine size is 3 liters, right? Now we can save it. And now we have this one entry here. We can create a new entry here. We can upload entries. And this is really nice because we don't need any external data sources, data types. We also have something called an option set, which allows you to create a bunch of options together. So you can have, multiple option sets that has various options in it, that kind of like built-in options that you can use in the UI and various things. And then you also have a file manager, so you can upload stuff. You can, so if you have an app where the user is uploading data, you're gonna have this here. You're gonna have it all stored here, something like user-generated data. Let's say a blog, image attachments, videos. Maybe you're building a YouTube clone. They can upload the videos, and that's gonna be here. So what's nice about it is that it's actually a relational database, right? Because if you take a look at cars, we have a link to user, right? So I can actually create a new type, and let's say I don't know, model, right? So let's say this is model, this cars is the brand or something like that, right? So we have the brands here, and then I can create a model. So that way that, one brand can have multiple models. So I can do that, and I can call this model. Actually, what do we have? Model. So I can call this brand, and this is going to be linking to brand, right? And this field is multiple entries, right? You can do that, you can do this, and now you have a link back. So we have a model, and that way when I go to app data and I want to create a new entry, and let's say I want a model, it's going to ask me, I can actually have a brand, right? I can have a brand BMW, I can have a model here, I can do all of these interesting things, right? And now it's actually picking up data from the brand. It knows that this is a brand. So if I want to create a new model, or I want to create multiple models linked to that one brand, I can do that because it's kind of like a relational database. This is actually really cool. There's not a, it's kind of a nice bonus because I've seen other tools that don't really have this very sophisticated data management. The next thing we have is styles. And this is where you define your styles, right? So when you actually design your app, you go to click me here, you double click on it, you have styles here, right? This is the primary button. You can outline it, but you can also remove style and do it yourself. You can set your own font here. You can define it yourself. See, I just changed the font. That doesn't look that good. So we can, I don't know, we can have something like this. That looks kind of weird too. We can change the text here. These are styles. But if you go here to styles, you can search it by name. So if I type button, we have our styles for buttons. So we have the primary button, we have outline button. So you can change the styles for this button. This is kind of like CSS, if you're familiar with the cascading style sheets. And so you can modify any style, and you can even add style, you can apply theme, you can do a lot of interesting things. What I typically do is when I go into design, I typically, if I want to play with it, I want to, change it around, I don't really, I don't mess with styles. I just remove style, and then I just, set it to whatever I want to set it. Let's say I want this to be bigger, maybe 22. I make it a little bit bigger, just like that. But in more complex applications, it might be a good idea to define some styles so that you have a consistent layout of how your app works. All right, so that was styles. Next thing is, let's talk about plugins, right? Plugins are basically pieces of code that do various things. So they can do workflows, they can have a design element, they might have a data element, they might have various things. The plugin that I use a lot is an API plugin, right? So if you type API here, you're gonna have this plugin. It's used by 235,000 apps, and this is a plugin developed by Bubble, and this allows you to create, send and receive API calls, and this is a built-in plugin. And so there's lots of different plugins on various things. They vary by quality. Some are actually built by Bubble. This could be a good option to go through to these plugins. Other plugins are, there's user plugins, there's third-party plugins, right? Anything not built by Bubble is called a third-party plugin. You have, this person here just created a plugin here. It's not used by, it's used by relatively fewer apps, but still it could be a good plugin. You can click done and you can do that. I actually have a couple of videos about doing plugins that I'm going to be linking above in the corner. You should be able to see that. But in the future, I hope to create more videos where I would teach you how to build any kind of plugins that you want. Last but not least, we have settings. Actually, this is the one before last. We also have logs that I'm going to talk about in a second. And settings is your application setting. You have the app plan, you have the general settings here, the main email, languages, SEO, API, collaboration, sub apps and versions. I don't really mess with this too much, and you're probably not going to be messing with this too much. The only thing you need to fill out some API keys if you're going to be using something like Google Maps, which you might be using, because that's actually a pretty cool feature in Bubble. Because if you want to use something like maps, so if you go to design and you scroll down and you just you pick it up here, this map thing, this is going to be using Google. So if you want this to work in production, if you don't want to have any issues with it, you need to actually go to Google, and you can see all instructions for doing. If you click on this doc and doc, you can just get your free API keys that are going to be valid in order for you to build a simple map app, right? So if you go in here, you're using a map, and I have actually a video on map. I'm going to be linking it above that talks about how to work with maps specifically, so you can learn more about that. And that is settings. I don't really mess with it too much. You can kind of modify some things here and there, change some images. These are like, this is what I call the icing on the cake. And last but not least, we have logs. And the logs are, your application, right? So we have server capacity, we have server logs. If something is happening, your app is running, it's going to be logging. We also have a scheduler. It's going to display upcoming scheduled workflows. In the development version, you can switch it to live and have a scheduler. So you can have various tasks that could be scheduled in the future, sometime in the future, that are going to be performing various things, which could be useful if you are building a more complex application where you need certain tasks to happen at a set interval, or maybe at some defined future time. And then we have capacity. This is actually really cool because Bubble does everything, right? It's it does all the server provisioning. As a developer, if you need to build an app, if you're not using something like Bubble, you will have to worry about servers. If you have enough RAM, is the CPU enough? Is everything working together? But Bubble does all of that for you, and as a result, you don't have to worry about it, which is a huge relief. Because if you are somebody who wants to build an app, this is the only thing you really should be focusing on. You really don't need to be concerned with server administration. It's just gonna take time away from your main goal here, and so that is why this is a really nice thing. And so whenever you have the app running, whenever you finish building the app, you're gonna see some various activities here that's gonna tell you whether your app is using all the resources, some of the resources, and whether you need maybe to upgrade to a newer plan, or maybe make some changes inside the app so that it doesn't use as many resources if it's using a lot. And before we go, I also want to point out that you can create multiple pages by going here, right? So this is a page, right? We have the index. This is called an index. So if you click out, right? So if I click on an element, I see the things, the properties with the element. If I click on the page, if I click out, right? If I click away, away from the existing elements. And what I'm looking at is the page, the properties for the page. And we have appearance, conditional, transitions, various things that has to do with the page. We have the page title. We can change that around. We can do that. And now, the name of the page is different, but we can also click here and we can choose a page. So as you can see, we have an index 404, which is the not found page, and we have a reset password page. We also have reusable elements as well. So I have my footer, I can click on it, and I can take this. So this is reusable. So for instance, I can go to header, I can view it. This is what it looks like. I can modify it. Then I can go back to the page, and I can scroll down and here I have my reusable elements. So I can choose this header, drag and drop it, and it's going to be here on the top. And now we have a header, right? And if I want to modify it, all I have to do is go in here, go to header, go change it around, change some things around, and it's all going to be reflected wherever I'm using this reusable element. So that makes it really, really cool. So this is a nice little thing. You can create a new reusable element, as well as you can delete the previous reusable elements you have here. You also have these nice previews, which is a nice touch in case you may have some reusable elements that have similar names, so you're not sure which is which. So if you hover over, you can actually see a little preview of this reusable element, but you can add new pages. You can choose a page, so I can go in here, go back to my index, and now I'm back in index. All right, guys, so this is your general overview of Bubble, kind of this 30,000 feet bird's eye view from the sky, just to kind of understand how it works. But the main thing you guys got to understand is this MVC framework, because a lot of you are probably not coming from a tech background, so you might not be aware of this. But once you understand this, a lot of things that I'm going to be talking about in future videos become a lot clearer. All right, guys, so I really hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know below in the comments what you thought about it. Let me know if you needed some clarification, and also let me know some ideas for future videos. So if you enjoyed this video, you know what you do. Smash that like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in any kind of no-code content, which means creating any kind of app without writing a single line of code. So once again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.